was the last summer before the World War. The last summer of the old world. To the average man and woman in the streets of the Western world, someone who was alive in the vibrant early years of the 20th century, nothing would have seemed further away than war. In those years, men who dreamed of battlefield adventure would have been hard-pressed to find a war in which to participate. In the year 1901, and in the 13 years that followed, the peoples of Western Europe and the English-speaking Americas were becoming consumers rather than warriors. Motor cars and motorcycles, airships, electric trains and submarines, novelties to while away the increasing leisure time. An emerging middle class looked to more and more years of more and more progress, more prosperity, and more peace. There had been no war among the great powers for nearly half a century, and globalization of the world economy suggested that war had become a thing of the past. To many, in that hot, sun-drenched, gorgeous summer of 1914, the most beautiful within living memory, Europe had become a kind of Eden. Stefan Zweig spoke for many when he wrote that he had rarely experienced a summer more luxuriant, more beautiful, and, I'm tempted to say, more summery. Middle and upper-class Britons in particular saw themselves as living in an idyllic world in which economic realities would keep the European great powers from waging war on one another. For those with a comfortable income, the world in their time was more free than it is today. Until 1914, a sensible, law-abiding Englishman could pass through life and hardly notice the existence of the state. One could live anywhere one liked, as one liked. One could go practically anywhere in the world without anyone's permission. For the most part, one needed no passport, and many people had none. The French geographer André Siegfried traveled all around the world with no identification other than his visiting card. It was a time of free capital flows and free movements of people and goods. There was more globalization before 1914 than there is now. Much of the final quarter of the 20th century was spent merely recovering ground lost in the previous 75 years. Economic and financial intermingling and interdependence were among the powerful trends that made it seem warfare among the major European powers had become impractical and indeed obsolete. In the Western world, ordinary people felt no apprehension about a possible conflict. There were leaders who worried, but in the winter and spring of 1914, not even they expected war to break out in the summer. France would have liked to have recovered territories taken away by Germany decades before, but those well-placed to judge were certain that France would not start a war to get them back. The Russian Prime Minister reported to the Tsar on December 13, 1913, that all French statesmen wanted quiet and peace. They are willing to work with the Germans. There was no doubt that at the end of 1913, Franco-German relations were on a better footing than they had been for years. Germany feared eventual war with Russia, but in the winter of 1914, they knew the Tsar's armies were in no condition to wage war, and would not be so for several years.
doesn't bloom, so shine on, harvest moon for me and my gal.
Those glorious last days of June 1914 cruised above a summer sea and cloudless skies until they were hit by a bolt they wrongly believed came out of the blue. The route which led the major powers of Europe to war in 1914 was long and tortuous, with many factors driving them to armed conflict. Perhaps the most important and obvious was the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. That limited confrontation had seen the humiliating defeat of France and the unification of the German states under Prussian leadership. The sudden emergence of the German Empire, which as part of the spoils of victory took the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine from France, brought about a fundamental shift in the European balance of power. Germany's accelerated progress towards economic and military ascendancy only intensified the anxieties of her neighbors. In 1913, Germany, second only to America, was the most powerful industrial nation in the world. For the best part of 2 decades, between 1871 and 1890, the new European status quo was not seriously challenged, thanks to the diplomatic dexterity and deviousness of Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor, who kept France isolated. When von Bismarck left office in 1890, it was not long before a fresh series of unpredictable currents began to erode the foundation of his carefully constructed continental system. A rapid deterioration in Russo-German relations and a rapprochement between Tsarist Russia and Republican France compelled Germany to strengthen her existing links with the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy. This alliance ensured that she possessed an ally to the east. Germany would pay a heavy price for a policy that tied her more closely to a dilapidated empire that was itself finding it increasingly difficult to curb the nationalist aspirations of its diverse population. The potentially explosive situation in the Balkans was made more dangerous by the decline of Turkish influence there. In seeking to exploit such opportunities, Austria and Russia each embarked upon a course which could only end in confrontation. The rise of Serbia added yet another hazardous element to an unstable regional mixture. Serbia had been infuriated by Austria's annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. In turn, Serbia gained influence and territory as a result of the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13, giving Austria mounting cause for irritation. With the departure of Bismarck, the belligerent and erratic Wilhelm II, who had become Kaiser in 1888, soon spurred Germany to follow a more aggressive path in international relationships. France, already determined to avenge the disaster of 1870 and win back her lost provinces, was further alarmed by Germany's developing industrial and military muscle. Russia, too, had grounds for concern about the Austro-German alliance that not only threw an ominous shadow along her western frontier, but was likely to counteract Russian interests in the Balkans. The first and probably the most significant crack in the edifice erected by Bismarckian diplomacy came in 1892, the removal of its cornerstone, the isolation of France. That year, Russia and France concluded a military agreement reinforced by additional talks in 1893 and 94, under which each promised to come to the other's aid if either were attacked by Germany. This change from Bismarck's Realpolitik to the Weltpolitik of Kaiser Wilhelm II ultimately forced Britain to review her relations with the other leading players on the European and world stage. Britain was relatively friendly with Germany for much of the last quarter of the 19th century, not the least because Queen Victoria's eldest daughter was married to the German Crown Prince Frederick, who succeeded to the imperial throne in March 1888. Frederick died of cancer after reigning for barely 3 months, and the accession of his estranged son Wilhelm II heralded fresh competition with Britain for colonies and overseas markets, as the new Kaiser sought world power status for Germany. His first public words as Kaiser were not to the public, but was addressed to his armies.
We belong to each other, I and the army. We were born for each other and will indissolubly cleave to each other. I promise ever to bear in mind that from the world above, the eyes of my forefathers look down on me, and that I shall one day have to stand accountable to them for the glory and honor of the army.
The German army, led by Prussia, was the most powerful military organization in the world. But it was Germany's naval expansion which alienated Britain.
Our naval power involved British existence. If our naval supremacy were to be impaired, the whole fortunes of our race and empire would perish and be swept utterly away.
Shaped by Rear Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz with the Kaiser's support, the Kriegsmarine disclosed its intention to construct a fleet of 38 battleships within 20 years. Regarding Britain as the most dangerous bloc to Germany's growth, Tirpitz envisioned the German fleet as a political pawn which would strengthen his country's hand in world affairs. The launching of 14 battleships in Germany between 1900 and 1905 inaugurated a naval arms race that would enter an even more menacing phase when Britain launched the revolutionary, turbine-driven, all-big-gun battleship HMS Dreadnought in 1906. Each launching drove Germany and England farther apart.
I explained to him that the real ground for the growing antagonism in this country towards Germany was not jealousy of her rapidly expanding commerce, but fear of her growing navy.
The Kaiser did not care.
I do not wish for a good understanding with England at the expense of the extension of the German fleet.
German backing for the Boers during the South African War of 1899 to 1902 hastened the demise of Britain's earlier isolationist policy. In 1904, Britain signed the Entente Cordiale, which greatly strengthened the diplomatic and military tie with her traditional rival, France. A similar understanding was reached with Russia in 1907. Thus, before the close of the 19th century, Britain had swung noticeably toward a Franco-Russian alliance. The understandings with France and Russia did not constitute formal agreements, and neither did they commit Britain irrevocably to go to war in support of either power, but she was morally bound to France and Russia against the Central Powers. An unforeseen incident involving one or more of these countries might well ignite a general conflagration which, because of the rival alliance systems, could engulf them all. Sunday, June 28, 1914. Early in the morning, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his consort, Sophie, prayed at Mass in a chapel set up for them at their hotel. Leaving the suburban spa, they boarded a train to Sarajevo, a trip of less than half an hour. At the railroad terminal on the outskirts of town, they transferred to a motorcade in which they rode the rest of the way. The procession of chauffeur-driven motor cars entered Sarajevo somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, heading for the town hall. The morning rain had stopped. The top of the car had been lowered. That morning, Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb teenager whose career choice was to be a martyr, had stationed himself and his fellow conspirators along the Apple embankment at 3 places where it was intersected by bridges. The Archduke's motorcade driving along the quay would be running a gauntlet of nationalist assassins. At the first of the bridges, the Archduke's procession entered a kill zone. 3 conspirators formed a line along the river side of the quay and 2 on the land. The first attempt on the Archduke's life came from the riverside, from Angelico Kabrinovich, who asked a nearby policeman to point out which was Franz Ferdinand's motorcar. Then he knocked the cap off his bomb on a lamppost to detonate it. He threw the bomb wildly at the Archduke's motorcar, hitting the folded back hood of the convertible, from which it rolled off to explode against a wheel of the car following it. The Countess felt a graze on her neck from the detonator, while the occupants behind received slight wounds. Princip, who had heard the explosion and shouts from the crowd, hurried to the spot where it looked as though all was over. The gendarmes had Kabrinovich firmly in custody and were hauling him off to the police station. None of the other conspirators was to be found. Alone, Princip wandered back to what had been his appointed station on the riverside of the Appel embankment, at what was called the Latin Bridge. He then crossed the street. Of the others, one was so jammed in the crowd that he could not pull the bomb out of his pocket. A second saw a policeman standing near him and decided that any movement would be too risky. A third felt sorry for the Archduke's wife and did nothing. A fourth lost his nerve and slipped home. Franz Ferdinand decided to cancel existing plans which called for his motorcade to maneuver through winding alleys on the way to the museum. After a stop at the town hall for a reception and speeches, he insisted on driving to hospital to visit Colonel Marizzi, who'd been lightly wounded in the bombing attack. The driver in the lead car was not told of the change in plans and turned off the main road toward the museum. When the mistake was realized, the Archduke's driver halted his car to consider how best to get back on the route to hospital. Meanwhile, they sat motionless, less than 5 feet from the dejected Princip. He was astonished at his sudden good fortune. He quickly seized his chance. He reached for a bomb in his pocket, but became aware that, hemmed in by the crowd, he could not swing his arm to toss it at his target. So he pulled out his pistol and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. His first shot hit the Archduke in the jugular. His second caught the Duchess in the abdomen as she was rising to her husband's aid. Princip then turned the revolver on himself, but was prevented from firing it by a bystander who hurled him to the ground. Confusion erupted as the crowd and nearby police battled one another to get at the boyish assassin. Princip tried once again to kill himself. Reaching into his pocket, he removed a capsule and swallowed it. The poison was old and only made the assassin vomit when it would not work. The mob closed in about him and began to beat him. Eventually, the police wrestled him away from the crowd. Meanwhile, the limousine fled to seek help. Sophie dear, don't die. Stay alive for our children, Franz Ferdinand called out. And then, more weakly, he repeated over and over, "It is nothing," as his aides anxiously asked how he felt. The first shot was fired at about 10:30. Sophie died at roughly 10:45. The Archduke around 11 o'clock. It was not nothing. Had the murders in Sarajevo been committed even a century earlier, it would have taken weeks or months for word of it to reach faraway places. The consequences might have been far different, but technology had changed all that. The foreign officers of the world knew of the shooting at once. In Germany, the Kaiser was informed while racing in a regatta aboard his yacht, Meteor. Wilhelm decided to return to Berlin. In England, the outrage, as the assassinations were called, dominated the foreign reporting published in the morning's London Times. In France, at the first cabinet meeting since the assassinations, the killings were hardly mentioned. Indeed, in all the capitals of Europe, the reaction to the assassination of the heir to the Habsburg throne was calm to the point of indifference. The truth of the matter was that few in Austria-Hungary were sorry that Franz Ferdinand had been removed from the scene. True, the leaders of the dual monarchy deplored the killing of royalty, but if someone of the blood had to be sacrificed, the Archduke was everybody's choice to be the one. Of course, the heir apparent was next only to the Emperor, the most important figure in the Habsburg Empire. In murdering him, upstart Serbian terrorists threw down a public challenge to the very existence of the empire. If Vienna failed to respond, it would lose by default. But that was not the reason that the dual monarchy sought to destroy Serbia. The Habsburgs wanted to destroy Serbia before the assassination. The killings gave Vienna an excuse, not the reason, for snuffing out Serbia's challenge to Austro-Hungarian authority in the Balkans. First, Austria sought Germany's backing. In turn, it saw in the Austro-Serbian confrontation a golden chance of securing hegemony in Europe, achieving world status while splitting the encircling Entente powers, forestalling Russian modernization, and eradicating the dangers of Austria-Hungary. The Kaiser believed that, as in the past, they could keep this conflict local without going to war with other powers. The German ambassador to the dual monarchy reported to the Kaiser.
Count Berchtold, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister, told me today that everything pointed to the fact that the threads of the conspiracy to which the Archduke fell a sacrifice ran together at Belgrade. I frequently hear expressed in Vienna, even among serious people, the wish that at last a final and fundamental reckoning should be had with the Serbs.
The Kaiser noted in the margin of his copy of the report, "Now or never." 4 days later, on July 6th, he sent a message to the Austrian Emperor.
The Emperor Franz Joseph may rest assured that His Majesty will faithfully stand by Austria-Hungary, as is required by the obligations of his alliance and of his ancient friendship.
And with that, on the same day, the Kaiser went back on a summer cruise on the royal yacht in Scandinavian waters. As Europe continued its perfect summer vacation, Austria went off to cash Germany's blank check for unconditional support against Serbia. Having obtained Germany's endorsement 25 days after the Archduke's assassination, Austria issued a 10-point ultimatum to Serbia. Germany's leading military figures had been on leave in July, as had the Kaiser, the Chancellor, and the Foreign Secretary. After the Austrians had set a fixed date for their ultimatum, Berlin quietly signaled its leaders to return. They did so from July 23rd onward, returning singly so as not to create an uproar. Then they began to debate what to do next. Germany's overlapping army leaders, Chief of Staff von Moltke, War Minister von Falkenhayn, and Military Cabinet Chief von Linke were among the several key officials debating the issues of war and peace after the return from vacation. For Moltke, the arguments were particularly frustrating, in part because civilian leaders shared neither his point of view nor his objectives, and in part because they did not know what he knew. A Saxon officer who spoke with Moltke's deputy on July 23 reported that he received the impression that the great general staff would be pleased if war were to come about now. Von Moltke did not fear Russian mobilization. He devoutly desired it. For Moltke was uniquely aware that time was running out for his country. Germany was committed to follow von Moltke's own grand strategy, a strategy few were aware of. The Kaiser, Falkenhayn, and, until July 31, the German Chancellor, Bethmann, were among those in the dark. None of them knew that Moltke, had already put his plan for his opening moves in the war into motion. On 25 July, Serbia accepted 9 of the points, but rejected in part the demand that Austrian officials be involved in the investigation of the assassination, regarding such interference as a challenge to its sovereignty. On 25 July, Serbia also mobilized her army. Russia, too, confirmed partial mobilization before entering a period preparatory to war on 26 July. Austria reciprocated by mobilizing the same day. Then, on 28 July, the dual monarchy declared war on Serbia. Now, up to this point, it might still have been possible to isolate the problem, but Germany continued to act in an uncompromising manner to heighten tensions and gave the crisis an international dimension. On 29 July, Germany demanded an immediate cessation of Russian preparations. Failing to do so would mean that Germany would mobilize her army. The German Imperial Chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, instructed the ambassador in St. Petersburg.
Kindly call attention to the fact that further confirmation of Russia's mobilization measures would force us to mobilize. And in that case, a European war could scarcely be prevented.
Russia could not afford to acquiesce meekly on the destruction of Serbian sovereignty or increased Austrian influence in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Consequently, on 30 July, Russia ordered a general mobilization in support of Serbia. Russian mobilization began the following day, but was not the inevitable precursor to war. Her forces could, if necessary, have stayed on their own territory for weeks while negotiations proceeded. The actions of Germany heightened the tension. At 1:45 p.m. on 31 July, Germany proclaims a Kriegsgefahrzustand, or threatening danger of war. 3:30 p.m., the German government addresses Russia and France. Germany presents Russia with an ultimatum. Unless she demobilizes within 12 hours, full mobilization in Germany will follow. The German ambassador in Paris is told mobilization means war. France is asked for guarantees of neutrality. Events were rapidly moving out of control. When Russia failed to respond, Germany ordered a general mobilization. Time was running out. Mobilization in each country was the moment when a war plan took effect. Nowhere was this clearer than in Germany, since Germany had become a prisoner of her own plan. The Schlieffen Plan had been originally shaped in 1897 and revised in 1905 by Count Alfred von Schlieffen, then chief of the German General Staff. Schlieffen's overriding aim had been to enable Germany to deal successfully with the strategic nightmare of a two-front war against Russia and France. However, by appearing to offer a feasible solution to this problem, the plan reduced the Army's fears of a two-front war and strengthened its willingness to accept the risks of such a conflict. Schlieffen estimated that should Germany have to face both France and Russia, the latter would be slower to mobilize and deploy, giving Germany a vital margin of some 6 weeks in which to overpower France by means of a massive and rapid campaign. As soon as France was defeated, Germany could then transfer the bulk of her forces to the east to meet the Russian steamroller. There was a danger, nonetheless, that the fortresses along France's northeastern frontier might fatally delay the German army's lightning western offensive. Accordingly, Schlieffen resolved that German forces must cross a narrow strip of Dutch territory known as the Maastricht Appendix, then sweep through Belgium, trampling neutrality before driving into northwestern France. The pivotal role was given to 5 armies deployed by Metz and Holland, totaling 35 corps in all. The most powerful forces were allocated to the extreme right wing of the offensive. One army here was expected to swing round to west of Paris on the outer flank of a colossal wheeling movement which was intended to take the opposing French armies in the rear before trapping them against their own frontier. Colonel General Helmuth von Moltke, Schlieffen's successor, made several key alterations to his original plan between 1906 and 1914. Though a diligent and painstaking officer, Moltke was also introspective and suffered from bouts of low self-confidence. He weakened the right flank and abandoned the planned move through Holland. These decisions would prove to be unfortunate. On 1 August, Germany could wait no longer for an answer from the Tsar and declared war on Russia. Honoring her agreement with Russia, France mobilized and set in motion the remaining cogs in the intricate machinery of European alliances. On 2 August, Germany handed Belgium an ultimatum insisting on the right of passage through her territory. The Belgians took less time to deliver a sharp no. The next day, Germany declared war on France. The French declaration of war quickly followed. Early on 4 August, German forces crossed the frontier into Belgium. The strength of the German armies on this flank was impressive. Colonel General Alexander von Kluck's First Army on the extreme right numbered 320,000 troops. The neighboring Second Army under Colonel General Karl von Bülow and the Third Army, commanded by General Max von Hausen, respectively totaled 260,000 and 180,000. The invasion of Belgian territory brought the final major player into the conflict, Great Britain.
I ask the House, from the point of view of British interests, to consider what may be at stake. If France is beaten to her knees, if in a crisis like this we run away from obligations of honor and interest as regards the Belgian Treaty, we should, I believe, sacrifice our respect and good name and reputation before the world, and should not escape the most serious and grave economic consequences.
God grant we may not have a European war thrust upon us, and for such a stupid reason too. No, I don't mean stupid, but to have to go to war on account of tiresome Serbia beggars belief.
Britain had no formal agreement with France and Russia, but was committed in principle by a treaty concluded in 1839 to guarantee Belgian neutrality. The hour had struck. At 11 p.m. on 4 August, time ran out for the last summer of the Old World. Standing on the balcony at his residence, British Home Secretary Sir Edward Grey watched the lamp-lighters move along the street below.
The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime.
The Great War, begun in 1914 and lasting for 4 hellish years. It was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. We have come to know it as World War I only because another world war followed it 20 years later. But back then, nothing like it had ever been seen before. A dirty war of mud and trenches, concertina wire, gas attacks, murderous artillery barrages, and a new weapon which first saw wide usage on the battlefield, the machine gun. It was a war mostly without chivalrous conduct, except in the air. On the ground, one killed the enemy however one could, and as often. big guns never seemed to cease their incessant pounding, and the dead piled up by the hundreds of thousands, and then the millions. Sulfa and penicillin were either unknown or in but limited use, and those not killed outright often wasted away from infection and diseases historically attendant on battlefields. There was boredom as well, except when the guns were firing, and long periods of inaction where inept generals tried to figure out new ways of fighting for which they were totally unprepared. Ypres, key to the Channel ports, was shelled continuously by the German Kaiser's big guns. The agony and bloodshed suffered by this city went on during the whole of the war, until there was not left standing one stone upon another. It is all rebuilt now to its former glory. Today, survivors of the old British Regiment of Contemptibles attend a reception in their honor.
All right.
I signed the book when I was here before.
Did you?
Yes. As soon as you said it.
I was a child. My home was on the other side of the hospital military cemetery in Vlamertinge, 4 kilometers from the center. I was very often on that cemetery without understanding what in the middle of the nature. In peaceful Flanders fields of our days, such a cruel war destroyed so many lives and families. I imagined a young boy of 18 years arriving in Ypres to fight for the freedom of our dear soil of Flandrian fields. I hear the song of the blackbird, and there was sorrow in my heart. I felt very near a soldier of the Great War, always to their problems. The Pope, Mother Teresa, and Don Helder Camara were here, and each of them was crying when they were listening to the last post under the Menin Gate Memorial. May I invite you to have a drink on the past and on the future. On the past, to remember all your comrades buried here in the Flandern fields. Oh no, they are no longer strangers. Just as we pray on the tombs of our parents, we pray and dream of a better world on the tombs of the British soldiers. In all these years, they became also our dead. And let us drink on the future, into hope our children will live in a world of peace. May I also propose a drink on the friendship between the British and the Flemish people. Thank you.
ladies and gentlemen, chums, we've been given this really elegant plaque.
They were last here as boys of 16, 17, or 18. But all are now old and broken, many well into their 80s and 90s. But they still remember.
Yes, we arrived in there. There's a date on there, the 13th of October. We watered our horses in the cloth hall afterwards, and we were lined up.
We were just making our way up from the Marne to the Aisne. I was to be about 100 yards from it, and there was well, I don't know what size of a gun it was, but there was 4 horses dragging it along, you know, bring it along, and suddenly it got the whole of a shell. And we say, I can hear the screams of those horses now as the guns and the horses went up in the air. Really speaking, it was terrific.
In all the battlefields of northern France and Flanders, there is not one memorial to these sad, gentle, and patient creatures who served their human masters so faithfully and so well. In 1914, an attempt to cross the Menin Road here at Hellfire Corner was to invite certain death. Tom Sharp remembers crossing here with companions on a night exercise.
One night we were going to do a job of wiring and building the reinforcements in no man's land on Passchendaele Bridge. But as we came through Sanctuary Wood, all hell went loose because the artillery opened up and we saw in front of us the red lights sent up by the British forces that the Germans were attacking them. When you got across the Menin Road, there was nothing but a dirt duckboard track, which was only about 18 inches wide. And this duckboard track winded its way because the place had been so heavily shelled, there was no flat piece of ground anywhere. And you walked along this track and you had to follow on along. And if you fell off that track, you went in a shell hole, either 8 to 10 feet or 15 foot wide. And that was hopeless then. To get you out of there with a pair of heavy boots on you, the suction, well, it was a task that we couldn't deal with properly, so often than not we had to leave the men there.
At Nonaboshen, on the 11th of November, continuous and desperate attacks by the elite Prussian Guard were broken up with rifle fire, butts and bayonets of British troops. This was the last great battle of First Ypres. By Sanctuary Wood, there is a lonely grave of a subaltern lieutenant, aged 20 years. He lies here exactly where he fell. At the end of the war, a surviving young man of his command brought the lieutenant's grieving parents to the spot. At their request, he sleeps here through all eternity. In the Sanctuary Woods Cemetery lie many of his companions, barely out of adolescence when they died. These two octogenarians are remembering, no doubt, not only their companions from that long ago time when they too were of the same tender years, but how different their immediate surroundings were then. As the piper plays, the old troopers look down at one of the reconstructed trenches they spent so much time in during the war.
When the Gordon Highlanders was attacked there, not far from Huge Wood, they asked for reinforcements, and we went there to reinforcement. And then they done what they wanted to do, and we helped them the best we could. And then after that was on what they call Moral Reserve. We had to go somewhere else and help the boys there in case the Germans were to counterattack. And then we helped them there, and then we went back to the horse holders and went to another place called Gebelt. And that's when the Germans met us there, and we stopped them back the best we could.
Let me put it this way. I arrived in France at Saint-Nazaire. Then I came to the Marne, and then to the Aisne. We'd been on the Aisne about 5 or 6 weeks when we were told to come into this area because they thought that a naval brigade was on the point of being surrounded or captured, so they got into Holland. Well, anyway, then we made a bayonet charge at Langemarck. And we see, and 7 days later, 2 companies of ours, the Loyal North Lancashire Regiment, we were asked to, we were told to dig in and not to retire and not to advance no matter what happened. Well, later on, that was on the 30th, Friday the 30th of November, 1914. Well, they broke through, I believe, on the left, I think it was the Northamptons, somewhere about, well, first light. And then, but we knew nothing more then till about 11 o'clock on the morning of 31st of October 1914. And I understand they'd captured the headquarters, they'd captured our guns, artillery, which were firing two a blank and one loud to make a noise. We hadn't got much ammunition. And then just the night before when we were digging the trenches, I said to the officer, I said, are we right at the very front? He said, oh yes. I said, well, what are those voices? Oh, he said, they're Germans. Well, anyway, let me put it this way then. The Germans, after I got out of the trench, when you join the army, you're not told what to do in the event of being captured. So I got out of the trench with the rest, and, well, I nearly got a bayonet round through me because I didn't drop my rifle down quick enough. Well, then when they put us in fives then, and the officer was coming along, and when he got to me, I had a pipe in my mouth, and he got hold of it to pull it out. Well, I thought, well, it's my pipe, so I stuck to it. Anyway, a Corporal Taylor behind me shouted, let go of that bloody pipe, you fool. But not before the officer had got his big revolver twisted around me. Another split second, I'd have been upstairs or downstairs, I don't know.
We were taking shelter in Sanctuary Wood, standing to our horses. The infantry were filtering up by the side of us, and the wood was being shelled. And one of the fellows said to me, give me a light, chum, and I reached my hand under the horse's head to give him a light to his cigarette, and there was a burst of shrapnel overhead, and he fell dead. My horse had its ribs seared with a splinter of shrapnel, and there was a huge chunk of shrapnel embedded in my greatcoat immediately behind the saddle. After that, we pulled out of there, and my troop officer said, take your patrol up the Menin Road and see if you can find Germans. So I rode up beyond to Gellerveld Chateau, and we went in there, and there was nothing to eat but bottles of champagne. So we helped ourselves to a drink of champagne and went on towards Besselair. Running down over the crossroads at Gellivelt, we encountered a platoon of Uhlans, and afterwards came back and reported they were in fair strength on that bit of ground.
Jalouvel, also astride the Menin Road, where British troops and the Germans fought for control of the roads leading to the Channel ports. It was here at 2 p.m. on the 31st of October, 1914, that the Worcesters made their immortal bayonet charge across 1,000 yards of machine-gun-swept terrain. With dozens falling at every stride and far outnumbered, the Worcesters closed the gap that had left the road, Ypres, and the Channel ports wide open. This church was built by a grateful Ypres to allow visiting British survivors to fulfill religious obligations in connection with honoring their war dead. Adorning a wall is a bust of Marshal French, Viscount of Ypres, and commanding officer of the old Contemptibles. Today, the surviving Contemptibles have come for a Thanksgiving service and a dedication for one of their fallen comrades, Captain Charlie Park, one of the legendary 7th Division and the last of the Gordon Highlanders. His widow, Laura, who has traveled from Canada, is a member of this pilgrimage. With her is Captain Bill Wood, representing the regiment. The regiment's battle flags and colors are displayed and honored as well. Centuries-old Christian hymns are the order of the day. Memorial is erected by the Imperial War Graves Commission on the site of the former Menin Gate, where tens of thousands of British troops passed on their way to the front. A simple inscription over the chargeway reads, "To the armies of the British Empire who stood here from 1914 to 1918. Also on the memorial plaque, carved in stone, are the names of the officers and men of the 8th Salient who fell in combat. There are over 54,000 names. Each evening at 2000 hours, the last post is sounded by members of the local fire brigade. By this daily ceremony, the people of Ypres pay homage to the dead of World War I. Before the ceremony takes place, all traffic passing through what has been described as the most sacred British monument on foreign soil is halted. During World War II, the Germans stopped the ceremony, but even as they were retreating and while shots were still being fired, 3 firemen appeared and sounded the last post. The time was 8 p.m. Normally, only 2 or 3 firemen attend, but tonight they are out in force. As the piper finishes his funereal dirge, the laying of the memorial wreaths will follow.
Now the wreath.
It is hard for us today to imagine the intensity of personal horrors and experiences the Great War engendered in boys barely out of adolescence. But those same boys, now ancient and infirm old men, were profoundly altered by those experiences wrought by New Age warfare, just as society itself was altered from times before. There was literally no precedent for that war, and it shook European political and societal foundations to their core.
This is the first place I come to when I come up from Le Havre. We got off our horses and wagons off train and landed in a little field. Next morning, it was too little. Next morning I went into a big field. And we hadn't been in 10 minutes before we were all on the road. And I went to some of the trains they were digging. And I thought, before I knew where I was, they were all making for the road again. And that was the start of the retreat for us lot. And when I was down at these latrines, I soon had to pull my trousers up because they were all off making for the road and you couldn't get on the road. There was that many civilians and soldiers. And that was our start of the retreat of Mons for us lot there. Yes.
The names of the war dead are documented and no doubt well remembered by their comrades. But the presence of the piper and playing regimental tunes helps to recall the actual faces and voices of old comrades long dead.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are happy to receive you in our town. We ask you to excuse Mr. Grimaldi because he is in Paris for working and he is the senator mayor of the town and he works in Paris.
I'd like to wish you a very good welcome.
Et je vous invite à partager le verre de l'amitié.
And I invite you to share with us the glass of friendship.
Messieurs, Madame, chums, ladies and gentlemen.
Monsieur, Madame, dear veteran.
We are here today at Le Cateau because it was one of the most significant battles.
Nous sommes ici à Cateau aujourd'hui parce que c'était une des luttes les plus significantes de la Première Guerre mondiale.
Of the 1418 war.
Go ahead.
So far as the old contemptibles are concerned,
En ce qui concerne les vieux contemptibles,
it was the battle that saved the British Army.
c'était la lutte qui a sauvé l'armée britannique, l'ennemi.
Sir Horace Smith Doraine, or General Doraine as he was then,
Général Doraine
made the decision
a fait la décision
on his own responsibility
sur sa seule responsabilité
to stand and fight. The most significant spot
la part la plus significante
will be the crossroads that we are going to this afternoon.
Sera la ligne de Carrefour
where 2 battalions of British infantry
où 2 bataillons de l'infanterie britannique
with their deadly 15 aim shots to the minute
avec leurs 15 bullets par minute
halted the German army.
On arrêtait l'armée allemande.
On a battlefield devoid of any cover, the British troops turned and faced an enemy who outnumbered them 6-1. Pounded by some 500 field guns for over 6 hours in a bombardment the like of which had never been seen before, bone-tired and shell-shocked men held the line. With their line of communications destroyed, amidst scenes of incredible carnage, it was inevitable that when the order came to retire, it did not reach some of the units. These fought on until overwhelmed. Surrounded by fields of oats on the high ground overlooking the town is the aptly named communal cemetery. Buried here are some of the 7,812 casualties of the Crossroads battle that saved the British Army from disaster. Nestling amidst a sea of green foliage, the communal cemetery is shared by the townspeople, British and Empire troops, and by German soldiers. Bodies, now broken and decrepit with the infirmities of old age, still carry within a semblance of proud and straight military bearing. Contemptibles search for chiseled names and remembered faces amidst the stark white headstones, paying personal homage to fallen comrades.
I know there's so many stories, but this is only short, sharp and sweet. We were all singing, laughing and joking, walking across the Ain, on a bit of a plateau at the Ain. And in the twinkling of an eye, I was the only one left standing out of 400. You used to give us a loaf of bread between 4. But that night, the ones that were left, we got a loaf each.
To come, future generations will gaze upon the pages of this visitor's book and say, who was Frank Sumter? The pilgrimage also has its lighter side, as demonstrated by the old contemptibles one evening as they come to grips with the songs they used to sing in the camps and town cafes near the front.
Were the hearts of yearning, hear the voice of home. Keep the hoops are burning, the hearts of yearning, the lands of far away.
I didn't want to do it, I didn't want to do it. You made me want you, and all the time you knew it. I guess you always knew it. You made me happy sometimes, you made me sad, but there were times, dear, you made me feel so glad.
Coming on again, wishing for me. Oh, I feel the 90, gotta be done the 90, 90 is the place for me. Oh, Antonio, I'm all away. Left me all alone, Neil, all on my own, Neil. I'd like to meet him with his ice cream car. When upward go Antonio and his ice cream car. Mademoiselle from Almaty, Mademoiselle from Almaty, she hasn't been kissed for 40 years. Pinky, pinky, parley, pinky, pinky, parley, pinky, pinky, parley, waiting until my dreams all come true. Till the day when I'll be going down that long, long trail.
Sitting in tranquil surroundings amidst beautiful woodlands, only a few kilometers north of the town from which it takes its name, is the Plugsteert Memorial to the Missing in Action, those whose last resting place is known only unto God. There are almost 12,000 names engraved in the walls of the monument. One of them is the brother of Archie Stanley, killed in 1914, not far from Archie's own unit. Today, Archie, the oldest member of the pilgrimage, comes to lay a wreath in memory of his brother.
Lay it here,
Yeah.
and then you can have your own thoughts.
Well, what's the procedure?
You say what you want to say, and think what you want to think. We'll just have a few minutes.
Thank you.
The last post is sounded yet again. At the same location lie members of the Allied forces from Canada, Australia, and members of the Maori Battalion from New Zealand.
Some sheets on the bed, and whilst we were there, Rudyard Kipling came along and gave us an exhibition of his black Labrador retrievers, retrieving the birds, you know. And of course, I was there quite a time because I didn't need any more medical treatment, but I had four or five tubes like that through my arm to drain it.
Yes.
And they had to drain it before it healed up. So as I was a long-term convalescent case, they put me in there. And I had the best time of my life. I saw I only half lived.
How long were you there for?
Oh, quite a year. Quite a year, yeah. I tried to have a time live. And whilst we were there, the son of the house, they were a Catholic family, the son of the house was flying, taking photographs over the lines, and he got all his controls cut away. And he put his arms over the side of the aeroplane and he worked the wires with his hands. But by the time he landed, he was dead. And they got the map that was in front of his eyes, and all the blood splashes are right across the map.
Great.
And they sent that to his people.
His army age, because he's down as a rifleman. Had he been down as a boy, because we had the buglers at the beginning,
he would be on his, there would be boy who would have been his rank. There, as a rifleman, he gave a wrong age like myself.
One of the few towns that remained continually in British hands throughout First Ypres was Armentières. Although its greatest claim to fame is the song, Mademoiselle from Armentières, the Mademoiselle was actual, having kept a cafe just off the town square. Just outside the town, there's an area where one of the greatest stories of the war occurred. Archie Stanley was there.
But on Christmas Day 1914, it was a beautiful day. There was a sharp frost, and when the sun came up, it was brilliant. And about in the middle of the morning, the Germans got out of their defences and started to repair the damage, because at Armentières you couldn't dig there, there's too much water. And after about mid-morning, we found that they were doing that. We had no courage to fire back at them or to try to destroy them, so we followed suit. And one regiment on our left, I think it was the Leicester Regiment, they came out as well. They played football. I don't know what the result was. And we met the Germans in mid no man's land. And they offered us the cars, and we traded them with bully beef. And a little while I heard somebody talking English. So I looked around, I said, "Do you speak English?" He said, "God blimey, mate," he said, "I was in a little hotel when the war broke out."
Christmas time 1914, when we was in the trenches there, the woods was all around us, and if you spoke there, the echo went round and round, you see. Well, just to ask any questions, I shouted out, "Good morning, Fritzy," and the answer was, "Bollocks."
On the final day of the pilgrimage, Ypres is again visited, where a wreath is laid at the Rampart Cemetery. For the last time, the old contemptibles have a few hours in the town. A town full of bittersweet memories, which they seem loath to leave. So many of their boyhood comrades lie here, to sleep through eternity, cradled in the friendly soil of Flanders.
Yes, I was a little boy in 1914. I have 12 years.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Very good. That is really lovely.
How about you? No.
And 93.
93.
93.
88.
88. You're even pretty good.